Today we're going to touch into thyroid, something that kind of comes up and changes throughout the year, and summer is coming, and would be good to understand what is the connection of thyroid health with well-being, performance, aesthetics, because in bodybuilding ranks you'll hear something like, hey, just take some thyroid medication and you're going to get lean and shredded and whatever, whatever you choose to do there. But I would like to understand from you the basics of thyroid and how to test it, when to test it, why to test it, why is it even essential? Because we know more often than not, if people go and try to check their health, they get very limited data.
Yeah.
And very little can be actually told about your overall health from that. Like now, extremely popular is just testing your testosterone levels, which we know in grand scheme of things doesn't really tell much. It just tells your, how do you even I describe it? That your drug dealer, how much drugs to give you. It's pretty much it.
In terms of thyroid, most people will only get their TSH, right? And that literally tells us almost nothing about your thyroid system.
Thyroid stimulating hormone. So
Yep. So let's talk about that. And we have a video out, a thyroid video out with more details on like with visuals, right? But if a quick glance through that, there are at least 3 hormones that you want to be testing if you're looking into your thyroid health, right? So one is TSH, but these 3 that I'm going to mention are independent of that. That's free T4, free T3, and reverse T3, right? And so now I'm going to talk about the relationship between these 3 in relationship to time of day and potential calorie load and whether you need to change things with calories. Because most people just, especially in bodybuilding circles, they're like, oh, my thyroid is low because I've been dieting, which is technically true, but that's not the only reason for your thyroid to be low, right? And different forms of thyroid will be low with different circumstances. So let's talk about that a little bit. First, you have to understand that T4 specifically is inactive and T3 is active, right? So what does that mean? That means that T3 is actively stimulating your metabolism. That does not mean calories burned, right? This is a misconception that a lot of people, especially if you're coming from like fitness circles and stuff like that, T3 is not only dictating calories burned. What it's dictating is cellular turnover rate, total metabolism. So in other words, as T3 goes higher, you as a biological being are turning over cellular processes at a faster rate. In other words, your clock is sped up, right? You're sped up. If T3 goes down, your clock slows down. Metabolism slows down, cellular turnover rate slows down, and you conserve calories. So at the end, it's not actual calorie consumption or calorie release, because we all know that there is no such thing as calories inside the body. That's not a thing your body does anything with. And go back to our calorie video, it's all about electrons, right? So it's all about total energy, and energy can come from things that are not calories, okay? And so so now with that concept, right, that T3 is active, and that's what actually dictates metabolism going up and metabolism going down, T4 is inactive. And inactive meaning it is more of the storage format of thyroid. So it's potential metabolism ramping up or down, but it doesn't do it immediately. There is a really good reason for the body to do it like that, and that is this. T4, because it's inactive, is made at night because it does not mess with your activity level. It doesn't mess with making you awake or making you active. So it can be produced at night. As long as there's a correlation, there's something in the body that tells you how much thyroid to make. Because remember, thyroid is potential metabolism restoration, potential metabolism going up or down, right? So how does your body account for how much thyroid inactive T4 to make? That's related to melatonin. Melatonin comes from 90% of the melatonin in your body is not in the brain or in the pituitary or causing sleepiness. 90% of the melatonin in your body is dictated from the neck down. Cellular processes in the body that create reactive oxygen species at the mitochondrial level are what create 90% of the melatonin in the. So at night, when light, specifically blue light, but realistically all light, because under normal circumstances, not modern circumstances, the only light you would be exposed to is firelight. So that would be absent of any blue, and it would be significantly dimmer than sunlight. The absence or reduction of light in total, and definitely the absence of blue light, tell the body to activate the melatonin that got produced from cellular processes earlier in the day. That tells the body immediately, hey, the higher the melatonin level, the more restoration this person needs. And restoration starts at the cells. So more T4 will be made if more melatonin gets made. Because then in the morning, with either stimulation from it has to be a stimulation from the environment, external environment, and that comes in two varieties: cold exposure, if it's cold time of the year for you, or sunlight exposure, or just brightness in general, right? And that's why some studies have found that really bright lights help with some of the thyroid symptoms and stuff like that. But the thing that really does it the most is actual sunlight or cold, or the combination of those two if you're really trying to put a lot of pressure on the conversion of T4 to T3. So that happens in the morning to activate and wake you up, right? Along with cortisol. Cortisol should spike up along with T3, or a high conversion of T4 to T3, I should say, moving up to make you active for the whole day. So think about this, if those are so tied to light and dark switching, right? Then think about what will happen in the summertime when you have 16-hour days, really long days, really bright, because normally that's what happens in the summer. It's not as much cloudiness, not as much snow and rain and clouds and all of that type of stuff in most places. Then what'll happen is the metabolism starts to make a whole lot more T3 from your T4. In the wintertime, you should be experiencing more darkness. So you should be making more T4 in the wintertime if you adhere to good circadian practices, specifically at night. So you see how these two hormones start to play with each other, or cooperate with each other, I should say, depending on the season, right? In the wintertime, you should be experiencing more darkness, and T4 should actually be raising and going towards the upper levels. And then in the summertime, when the days are much longer, you should be experiencing more conversion of T4 to T3. So depending on the season and where you live, you may find seasonal variations in your T4 and T3 levels. They'll be within the acceptable range, but you will start to notice, hey, thyroid seems to go up for me if I have good circadian practices in the winter, because I'm experiencing more dark. And then in the summertime, more of that gets flooded over to high metabolism rate, because you need to now be active for 16 hours versus 10 hours, right? That's what the body's interpreting. That's just how T4 and T3 play together and where they're made. And you start to think about that objectively, it starts to tell you, hey, if I take some blood tests and my free T4 is really low, it tells me the place I should be concentrating more of my efforts to look into potential problems is sometime around the night or while you sleep. And if it's the other way, you have really good, normal T4, but poor performing T3, free T3, then the issue starts with in the morning. Something is signaling incorrectly now. Now, there are nutrients that are involved in this, right? There are nutrients that are involved in the thyroid hormone system, mainly iodine, selenium, right? Selenium is very, very interesting because it's a mineral element, and this is elucidated in science on selenium itself. It actually has dual actions. So it acts completely differently when there is light versus when there isn't light. Right? So that starts to tell you why nature has used selenium to incorporate into thyroid, because thyroid is actually the way that your metabolism turns off and turns on. And it turns on and off by how much light is interacting with it. That's why selenium is used in the thyroid system, because selenium has a very unique quirk at the elemental stage. It acts molecularly different when there's light hitting it versus when there isn't any light hitting it. That's why T4 can be inactive and T3 can be active. There's different amounts of selenium in those two hormones. So the way that you get most of those nutrients is going to be through proper seafood consumption. Like just let's put it that there's lots of things that contain seafood, iodine and selenium, but most of that's going to be seafood based, seafood, vegetables like seaweed, things of that nature, any kind of algae, and then obviously all the animal products. Now, that is something that the government has even known for a while, because that's why they add iodine to salt, is because when people don't consume those, one of those minerals will go awry, and that's iodine. So they tried to kind of help out with that, and that's why they add iodine to salt, because it is that crucial. If you do not consume significant amounts of iodine, you are going to have problems with thyroid. If you don't consume significant amount of selenium, you're going to have a problem. The problem that most people do is they try to supplement those directly. If you're going to supplement them, go with a supplement that already has something like a powdered seaweed, something that'll have iodine and selenium, but all the cofactors that go along with telling the body what to do with them, right? So obviously the whole foods are going to be better.
And is thiamine essential for these supplements?
I would say earlier, if you're somebody who is sensitive, like somebody that's really deficient in them, I would say yes, morning time would be better, because you'll probably get some kind of a stimulatory effect from the iodine specifically. And so I would just take it in the morning. I would take it in the morning with your first meal and go for that. Now, I did mention that there's a third hormone, reverse T3. Reverse T3 starts to tell us a lot about diet and calorie consumption or lack thereof. So as you go into a calorie deficit, or you are, I don't want to call it starvation mode, but you're intentionally either not eating as many calories, or in how nature would interpret it, there just isn't calories around to eat, right? Then what it does is the first step in conserving metabolism and lowering your metabolic rate is taking the T3 and flipping it to reverse T3. Reverse T3 is T3 that's been converted from T4. It's already active, but it's being bound so that it doesn't stimulate the metabolism, so it slows down metabolic rate. Now that we know happens very, very much with calorie deficits, right? The longer you've been in a calorie deficit, the deeper the calorie deficit has been, you should expect reverse T3 to go up, and your free T3 to either stay the same or slightly lowering, right? Now, other things that will cause reverse T3 to go up is the misinterpretation of the season. So in other words, as I described at the very beginning of this video, when you have high sunlight environment, T3 should be going up. Your body should be stimulating that to happen, and the conversion of T4 to T3 should be going on higher and higher, as long as you're signaling correctly, as long as you're getting outside at the bookends of the day, because that will tell the body, hey, the day is now 16 hours long instead of 10 hours long. So it starts to raise that conversion. But if you don't do that, but it is that time of the year, or you just happen to live a lifestyle where even in the winter, you're waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning and you're going to bed at 10 o'clock at night, you're essentially having a 16-hour day, but you are not getting any UV light stimulation. You're not getting any sunlight stimulation. So what that will end up happening is inducing a pseudo calorie deficit, or at least the body interprets that, because if people go back to our calorie video, it's not about the calories, it's about the electrons your body's collecting, right? At the end of the day, it's electron transport chain that's giving you the energy, not calorie transport chain. There's no calorie transport chain. So if you live a lifestyle that's completely indoors or majority indoors, and you have really long days that you're awake for, the body will interpret that as, hey, I'm trying to get you to eat more. It will make you hungrier because it's trying to find electrons that you're not giving it passively. And if you don't do that, right, you just continue to stick to, hey, I'm only eating 2,500 calories, whatever that might be, right? But my days are really long and I get very little sunlight, the body will interpret that as a low energy state and raise the conversion of T3 to reverse T3, and it's inactive. This is a very common thing that I see with most modern humans is T4 seems to be okay, but T3 is significantly underperforming. It's just not expected. Like, let's just talk about ranges so that people kind of conceive this. Their T4 will be in the high quartile of the range, but their T3 will be in the low quartile of the range. They're almost moving opposite from each other. And then you look at the reverse T3 and it's at the higher quartile of the range. Then that clearly tells me, oh, the body's interpreting an energy deficit, right? Most people would interpret that as a calorie deficit, and they're like, no, I've been gaining weight. I'm like, yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you're missing electrons. That's why the body's interpreting, hey, we need to slow down the metabolism and keep some of this T3 in the reverse T3 concept because we need to slow it down. If you take that far enough, you continue to live that lifestyle, eventually the body starts to raise binding globulins, so thyroid binding globulin, and antibodies, which is thyroid peroxidase antibody. Those are other mechanisms that will also bind up T3, and those have to do with the immune system. Those are more dependent on UV light stimulation. So you may start, maybe you get outside regularly every morning, right? Maybe you're like a construction worker, but you work indoors, right? You're a finish worker or something like that. I've seen this happen where they get up or they drive to work or walk to work or whatever, and they're getting plenty of sunlight stimulation and in the morning, and they get plenty of sunlight stimulation during the day. But the middle part of the day, basically from 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. whenever they go to work, clear up until 5 p.m., they're indoors all day long, right? They never go outside because they take their lunch break inside, they work indoors, and they're going from one job to the other. Those types of people will tend to have an immune system suppression of the thyroid system because the immune system is dictated by how much UV light interacts with the skin. That's how you make vitamin D, and that's also how you end up with a correlation of vitamin D and immune system, and vitamin D and sex hormones, and vitamin D in bone mineralization, because all of those, bone mineralization, sex hormone production, and immune system are all dictated by UV light interacting with you. And the thing that makes vitamin D is UV light. So UV light, vitamin D is a proxy for how much UV light you're assimilating, and how much UV light you assimilate dictates sex hormones, bone mineralization, tendon ligament hydration, and the amount of immune system regulation that's going to happen in your body.
And that's our endless fight with people who have sore elbows and knees and toes and whatever. It's like, just go outside a little bit more. It's might make a huge difference.
Yeah. For some people, it makes a very, very, very big difference. And so, yeah, and that's as concisely as I can put all the information without like boring people to death with like the science, is remembering those steps of how the thyroid system is being modulated by how much environmental factors you interact with or lack of interaction with.
So what's the relationship of thyroid and cognitive function? Because metabolism, it's great, but what about people who want to just mentally perform better?
Yeah, so a good thyroid value, like T3 specifically, that's the active format, is going to be actually dictating cellular processes, right? That's the one that's going to stimulate how fast you turn over cells. And some of those cells, like neurons and things of that nature, right, are going to be significantly dependent on the signaling process that is happening at the cell. So T3, raising T3, will tend to give you some cognitive performance, and doing that naturally, right? Just so that people clearly understand, taking oral T3 may or may not do anything. It will definitely move the T3 value, but it may not do anything for cognitive performances or how the thyroid system interacts with other places. The reason is because the deodoinase enzymes, which are the enzymes that help convert T4 into T3, those are what interact with everything else. Those enzymes, once there's an abundant amount of them, they are interacting with neurons and other cells, and those are what's dictating high firing rate of neurotransmitters and things of that nature. So it's not so much about the T3 value, it's do you have good conversion of T4 to T3? That tells us that the deodoinase enzymes are doing all of their magic of converting that, and coincidentally have secondary magic characteristics that are interacting with the neurotransmitters of the body.
Yeah, and this is something probably that we touched up also on hormone replacement therapy issues and stuff like that, that just trying to fix the value is probably not the best idea if you don't understand why that value is skewed up to begin with.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. If you don't understand if you don't understand why it's screwed up, that's why I went through the trouble of explaining one's active, one's not active, one happens in the morning, one happens in the evening, right? Because if you just start supplementing T4, you may even start taking it at the wrong time, and you may not, and you may get poor results out of your medication. I've seen that happen a lot, where somebody is recommended or prescribed T4, right? That's a nighttime hormone, as I described earlier. It gets made at night, but their doctor or somebody tells them take it first thing in the morning on a fasted stomach, and then 2 or 3 weeks later or 4 weeks later they retest their blood work, and not much has happened. They're like, my T4 value didn't go up that much, so they increase the dose. And then they increase the dose again. But then I'll come in and be like, well, take your T4 and put it at night, right before bed, after you haven't ate for an hour and after you've brushed your teeth. Next thing you know, we start taking their dose that they're taking and we start shrinking it down. The reason is because they're getting way more out of that dosage now, because that thyroid has now been placed in the right circadian timing of how things should work in the body, so that it gets interpreted correctly and assimilated into the body correctly, because the body doesn't do things out of step. It doesn't do this out of sequence on purpose. That's why thyroid system is so easy to mess up when you have a really mismatched circadian rhythm, is because the thyroid system is crucial to ensure that only certain hormones get made at certain times of the day, right? It's running a metabolic process, and only certain things should be made at certain times of the day. That is where there's a big misconception in the medical field in terms of replacement of thyroid. Let's just call it that.
And I believe it's kind of highlights again why we are so adamant to not give advice based on blood test results without sitting down and actually talking to a person. Because more often than not, what we see now, I had somebody who sent me his blood test results. And he's like, oh, I paid extra a couple £100 to just get this feedback. And I'm like, okay, type in that value that you saw with that feedback in a Google, and it's going to spit you out exactly the same feedback what that person gave you. Because they don't even assess you in any way. And it's not their fault, because you need to be just obsessed with these things to dig deeper, because more often than not, you get these results from GPs. And they have a million other things to worry about, not just like, hey, how do I analyze these blood tests? Whereas, like, we kind of like digging deep because it's so close to what we do every single day to ourselves. We have analyzed my blood test extensively, which is just absurdly unique, and it can't be compared to anything out there. All the studies out there would just look at me and say, dude, you're ill.
Yeah.
But it just shows how efficient my body is to adapt to all kind of different environments that I put my body through over the last 2-3 years. So going from this, what is the systemic impact of thyroid values on cardiovascular health, muscle, metabolism? So you touched upon metabolism. What can be expected in just overall well-being of your cardiovascular health, for example, if your thyroid
So good conversion again. So this is going back to that crucial thing of understanding the action is not in the values. The values just tell us how good you're being at running the metabolism. But the conversion of T4 to T3, when that's good, hey, and that even dictates if you're taking, exogenous T4, right? If you take exogenous T4 and a little bit of micrograms of exogenous T4 converts to a good significant amount of T3, that tells us you have really good conversion. That tells us good deodominase enzymes. And that, in turn, gets interpreted by other organ systems. Hey, these enzymes are working efficiently. There's lots of these enzymes around. That signals certain things to process. One of these, especially related to muscle growth and things of that nature, is the following. The liver uses some of these deodominase enzymes as a telltale of how much IGF-1 to make from your growth hormone that you've released at night. So growth hormone is not IGF-1, but the IGF-1 is a derivative of growth hormone, and that gets processed, or the amount of IGF-1 conversion is dictated by the liver. The liver is also one of the bigger organs that uses these deodolinase enzymes to convert your T4 to T3. So when there's lots of good conversion of T4 to T3, what that tells the liver is, hey, it must be summertime. It must be a good electron collecting season. And so what that does is it starts to upregulate how much IGF-1 gets converted from growth hormone, because that's going to coincidentally coincide with probably a season of abundant energy sources, right? Whether that's sunlight and food or a combination of both, it's anticipating that. So it starts raising the conversion of growth hormone to IGF-1 for a growth phase. This happens all the time, and parents will know this, right? When do your children hit growth spurts? Spring and summertime. It's not during the winter. It's in the spring and in the summer going into fall. The reason for that is this little dance that I just described. Kids, in particular, spend a lot of time outside. They like to go outside. They like to play a lot. They're getting this passive stimulation of the correct time of year that adults normally don't get because they have to go to a 9-to-5 job. That creates an abundance of IGF-1, an abundance of turnover of T4 to T3. Metabolism gets ramped up. IGF-1 gets ramped up. And your kid is freaking hungry all summer long. They're eating loads of food. So that combination ends up in a pro-growth phase, and it starts with that signaling of good conversion of T4 to T3 at the liver. And then the liver then coincidentally coordinates that with other hormonal changes that it's going to do, one of them being growth hormone conversion to IGF-1. And then, so that's from a muscle building total metabolism standpoint, right? At that point, you are actively utilizing extra calories for growth of tissues that are not storage tissues like body fat, right? People don't like people in that scenario, meaning whether you're a teenager or a young adult that has an outdoor lifestyle, you're not going to tend to put on body fat, although you may grow, right? Your scale weight will go up, but you're not going to be like all of a sudden fat. It's because those calories are being signaled to be turned into things because of all these secondary growth hormone actions that are happening. And coincidentally, sex hormones will also go up in that environment because UV light will sulfate more of the cholesterol that your liver is making, right? So again, going back to the liver, hey, the liver converted more T4 to T3. That means high deodolinase enzymes in the liver. The liver then takes that information and goes, oh, that means more growth hormone should turn into IGF-1. And then it goes, oh, that also means that we should probably start making more LDL cholesterol because this person is probably interacting with the sun more, and more LDL cholesterol will turn into pregnenolone and DHEA for more sex hormones. You see, it all coordinated nicely with the liver interpreting a correct response of conversion of T4 to T3. So that's why thyroid is very important, but it's not the values that are the most important. It's the conversion of T4 to T3 that's the most important, because that's going to coordinate with all these other secondary systems of pro-growth, like sex hormones, or somatotropin hormones like growth hormone.
Which brings me to asking you, what are the symptoms of imbalances? You know, like I know from experience from my blood tests and whatnot, if I at any point start to get my feet cold, then I probably need to check my TSH. But that's just years and years and years and looking into data and knowing exactly what it is. So what could people acknowledge, maybe put in a journal and reflect on that? Hey, you know what? I'm feeling more tired, or have more brain fogs than usual, or anything that you see that is really...
Those are all like baseline, I should go look, right? Hey, if I am experiencing cold fingers, cold toes, and especially if that coordinates with, I'm also feeling more tired, more sleepy, or I'm just not able to think really well, I have more brain fog, especially when you're getting more than one of those, right? You're getting some finger coldness, you're getting a little bit of extra sleep, or you're just feeling more tired, especially at the end of the day, than like prematurely, right? Than you normally have, then that's one of those things where it's like, hey, let's look at your thyroid system. Let's make sure that we get all the markers related to your thyroid system to see where the problem is, if there is a problem, and go from there. Other symptoms, right? Now, this is a flip side, right? You could be taking too much, right? Especially if, for example, you get prescribed T3 instead of T4, right? The doctor jumps, and that's not necessarily good or bad, right? He may just jump right to T3 and give you active thyroid right then and there, right? Can you take too much of that? Absolutely, because that's active now, right? If you orally take active T3, that is active immediately within an hour of you taking it. So things that can go wrong with taking too much T3, hair loss, just accelerating cellular turnover, right? You almost start to become somebody who's aging at a faster rate if you were taking way too much T3. And one of those that's going to show up that people are going to notice is hair loss. All of a sudden you'll start losing more hair than normal, and that's because those cells are turning over at a faster rate because you've raised metabolism too high. Other things is body temperature will just get way too hot, right? There are other factors with, I don't like to use hot and cold exclusively for thyroid, because depending on your age and your sex, it could be related to other things, right? But you will notice, that's why I say, if you have 2 or 3 of the symptoms, time to check your thyroid, right? If there's a temperature problem, too hot or too cold, hair loss or mainly hair loss problem, then that's also another one. And then the tiredness, right? Like inability to stay awake, or just inability to like really get going, especially in the morning time, or just crashing way earlier in the day, 2 or 3 hours before sundown, and you're just like, oh man, I could go to sleep and stay asleep all night long. That type of tiredness. Then that's when I go, okay, let's look at the thyroid system. There's probably something in here that we got to address, whether that's a morning time problem or a nighttime problem. That's why you need some blood work. People that come to me with just a TSH number, I unfortunately can only tell them to do everything because I don't know where to put pressure. That's why I find that most doctors really are shooting in the dark, because the only value they test is TSH. And if you're lucky, they might test total T4 or total T3. Like that even with those two values, TSH and total T3 or total T4, it doesn't tell you much, right? None of those are values that are free doing stuff. That's why it's free T4 and free T3 that you need, because those are the ones doing things. They're not gobbled up by thyroid globulin, for example, because you could have a lot of T4, but if your thyroid globulin is high, most of that T4 is in total T4 and not free T4, right? It's not doing much, right? So that's why that's why I went through the effort of explaining all those different intricacies. If you get the right blood tests, TSH, free T4, free T3, and reverse T3, if you get those 4, now you know exactly where you need to put pressure and whether you need to actually, if all of those values are low, right? If all of those values are low, and you have good circadian or pretty good circadian rhythm signaling, it purely might be, hey, you just don't have that much iodine going on, or selenium. And you could test those directly, right? You could test those directly, but you could just start consuming those and you could see a change probably within a month, probably 6 weeks or so. You would start to see a change if you truly were deficient in minerals that are dictating the production of thyroid.
What would be your advice? Because we see it very often, especially in more like advanced countries, where doctor just does not want to look into more than 1 or 2 values of anything. What would be your advice on how to get your healthcare provider to get on a board on doing a thorough test? What could people maybe tell them, or it's usually like they just take testosterone now?
So honestly, the first thing that I would say is I would explain to them that number one, if you come across as informed, the doctor tends to just go, okay, this person kind of has thought this out more than normal. I'll probably just order the tests, right? So number one, be informed. Listening to this video is probably step 1, so that you understand, hey, what about my inactive thyroid and what about my active thyroid? How are you checking the conversion, right? With just a TSH value. If you just ask a simple question like that, the doctor's going to go, okay, well, what should we test for? He might even ask you, what do you want tested at that point, right? So number one, being informed and knowing that there are different thyroid hormones and that there's free T4 versus free T3, and knowing the intricacies and just asking the right question. Hey, how do you know what my conversion is? And how do you know if it's a nighttime issue versus a daytime issue? And things of that nature. That immediately puts you on the pedestal of, now you're in control of the conversation. Now you can probably dictate what hormones to get tested. If that one doctor says, I still am not going to do that, then the answer, especially in America, is you're paying for that service, whether you know it or not. Go to a different doctor, right? Go to a different doctor because you're paying for it. Whether you think you're not, or whether you're like, oh, I have good health insurance, trust me, you're paying for it somewhere. It's either coming out of your check, or you're paying for it right then and there, or you're paying for it in your monthly premiums. You are paying for that service. Go to a different doctor. You are paying them, right? And then if all else fails, you go to a different doctor, they still don't want to test it. Then that's when I just guide people to go to Life Extension. And if you know what you're looking for, you can order a specific just thyroid panel. It costs you like $50, right? $50, $60. Very, very affordable, very cheap. They're not going to say anything about anything as far as like, oh, we won't run that test. That's what they're offering. They're offering, hey, here are all the thyroid values. Here's a little packet, and you just go test it, and you get all your thyroid values just like you would want from a doctor. I find that often becomes the simplest for most people, especially if they know that they only have a thyroid problem, right? Hey, I only have a thyroid problem. Well, pay $50 whenever you want and get all the thyroid hormones tested to see if your lifestyle changes or supplement changes or food changes are actually affecting things in the positive way. And Life Extension is not the only one. Life Extension is just readily available for everybody, but there are other private labs that you can. Yep. So there are other private labs that you can order in different countries. It'll be different, but there are ways to get these done privately if doctors won't order it. If you're in like a socialist country, that's a little bit more difficult, right? Just because then you're dependent on the doctors. The doctors will only run the blood work that the government allows them to run, right? That's the unfortunate truth with some countries. And I have ran into that every now and then.
Yeah, it's a bit easier now where you can just, I've had people flying into UK and just order a blood test kit and draw a sample and then fly out. And so there are ways around it, but yeah, more important than that, it feels like you just need to understand that looking at one thing doesn't really say anything. I always compare it to taking your car to garage and your person just looks at your tires and tells you, yeah, car is safe. No, it's not. It's just, you don't even know what's happening there. You know what I mean? So, and we always advise, hey, can you do it at least twice a year? Would be great to understand before summer, after summer.
At least once, right? At least once. So because then, if you get it done once, a full panel, like I recommend for a consultation with me, we see all the systems. We see your insulin sensitivity, how your pancreas is reacting to it. We see all your thyroids, both nighttime and morning. We see your sex hormones and your vitamin D, so that tells us about immune system and sulfation of cholesterol. We see your cholesterol profile and your cardiovascular risk because of C-reactive protein. We basically catch a glimpse of all the systems. And then we go, oh, okay, you really only have an issue with like one system. So then the follow-up blood work that you might get, 3 or 4 months later or every quarter only really needs to consist of those tests for that one system. So that's why I say at least once a year is good to, but that's the thing, like most people kind of agree with that. Hey, once a year I go get a workup with my doctor, but then you go look at the workup and it's just cholesterol values, right? I'm like, that's one system. That's not anything really. It's not going to tell you much. And, it's just cholesterol values and like blood glucose. It's really absurd that, that's your once a year checkup. It tells you almost nothing. The once a year checkup should check all the systems. And then if there's a problem with one or two, then your follow-up blood work could just revolve around those one or two systems for the rest of the year if you're doing something actively to change them. Or you might find, hey, once a year I check all the systems and every year they've come back exactly good. Then you're like, okay, I'll just follow up next year with a full system check of all the systems, right? Doctors unfortunately don't do that. They don't really get covered in most insurances of like being able to check all the systems. It's only really two systems, the glucose system and cholesterol. It's not even cardiovascular inflammatory markers like C-reactive, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, well, David, I'm mindful of your time. I'm going to let you off. Thank you as usual, and I'll catch you in the next video.